So I want to spend a little bit of time, especially on the tale of the second lady, the flogged one, the second of the two sisters who we speak in the wrapping up of the Porter and the Lady's stories. The story is one that is familiar. It is a story about marital trust and how this one sister gets married, and her husband is a bit tyrannical and will not allow her to even look at another man, as he puts it. Well, that's unrealistic, probably. And in fact, when she goes to a market, she does have to see lots of different people. She cannot realistically interact in society in any way at all. Even doing the functions of what women's work were, like shopping, cannot do that under this limitation. So it goes, and this one guy who says as payment, all he wants is a little kiss from her on his cheek, seemingly very chaste and modest. But of course, or he can kiss her cheek, whatever. And instead of a kiss, he takes a bite out of her cheek and leaves, presumably a wound there, something that you can see. And she goes home and she tries to hide it. No, honey, don't look at me. And she lies to him. The old woman, expressing anger, screeched and said, "Oh, my lady, God has saved me from something worse. Take this heart and let you go before the matter becomes public. Pretend to be sick and cover yourself up." Then I lay in bed, covered myself up, and drank some wine. Again, we have the reference to the wine. Nothing good comes in this story after you drink wine. It's always a warning sign. Never made explicit, but it's one of those values that seeps into the story. Husband goes, what is this? Oh, my darling, what is the matter with you? I replied, I have a headache. Classic excuse. He lighted a candle and, coming close, looked at my face and, seeing the wound on my cheek, asked, what caused this? I replied, when I went today to the market to buy some fabric, a camel driver with a load of firewood jostled me in the narrow passage, and one of the pieces tore my veil and cut my cheek, as you see. And his reaction is to, okay, tomorrow I'm going to give an order. Every camel driver in the city will be killed. A little overreaction. And she feels bad about that. So she makes up another lie. She says, I was riding a rented donkey, and when the donkey driver drove it hard, it stumbled and threw me to the ground. I fell on a piece of glass and happened to be there and cut my cheek. His reaction to this, well, you can see how he tends to handle crises. I'm going to go to Jafar, the Barmakid, his vizier, or Rashid's vizier, and ask him to hang every donkey driver and every sweeper in this city. He's got one remedy for every problem, and it's not rational. It is not proportional. I think you could say it is very clearly an overreaction. It's another example that we can see of men trying to restrict their wife's movement, in essence, to keep them prisoner, by telling his wife, you're not allowed to even look at another man. You cannot be in the same presence of other men. It is keeping her prisoner. She can't go out at that point. She is locked up, every bit as much as locked up as Shahryar's and Shahzaman's first wives, whom we meet at the beginning, and we see how that ends. They are essentially prisoners within their own palaces, and when those husbands go away for a little while, they act out, they lash out. It's what happens when you try to lock up something you love. You may think you're doing it for the best reasons, but by restricting them so much, they are almost inevitably, by the laws of, physics, going to burst out at some point. And that's what happens here again, in this pattern, again and again and again, manifests itself because Shahrazad is making it. She understands that, okay, we have repeated instances of people being held prisoners, specifically, most frequently perhaps, women being held prisoners, and bad things come from that. They get corrupted. Their sense of morality gets corrupted. Think of the genie who was locked in the bottle for all those years. He started out with, good and constructive social intentions, and those got corrupted over time because when you're cut off from humanity that way, you become demented in a way. And that's what's happening here. And Shahrazad is once again telling her husband, who's still technically, ready to kill her, the first peak of dawn. As far as she knows, he might be planning that. He has said a couple of times that, well, I'm going to wait another, I'll wait a little while longer. I might even wait a month. It's always put in terms of he thinks to himself. These are conversations he's having with it himself. He's not sharing it with her. He's not telling her, don't worry about it. Maybe we'll make it the first of the month thing. He's not telling her that. So as far as she's concerned, every night could be her last. She could, finish a story, and the minute she hears the rooster crow, that's it for her. Which is, again, sadistic in its own right. But you see how it is paralleling her, how it is an example of Shahrazad deploying this particular story to try and make a point, a very specific point that, again, is not made so explicit, but it's there. And if you just think about it for a second, it's obvious. On my page 712, you see more poetry laid out in nice broken lyric form, which tells you, like we said before, that these words, this is a formal construction of words, of language, of meaning that isn't necessarily the same as the meaning underneath, and that they need to be deconstructed, they need to be interpreted, and you should be aware of the different levels of what you're processing at that time. In the middle of the page, when I heard the words, O Commander of the Faithful, which is the Caliph, I wept, and looking at him, replied the following verses, because this husband and wife are now having this conversation in verse, needing to be deconstructed a little. You set my poor heart burning with your love, and left my eyes to smart, and went to sleep, while all alone I thought of you and wept, and in my sorrow did a vigil keep. Devotion, pure devotion to this man, but he's not really recognizing it. You promised to be faithful to the end, but when you had my heart, you broke the vow. I loved you in all my childish innocence. Kill not that love, for I am learning now. Which is exactly Shahrazad's position. She's saying, I married you when I was very young. She's still young. You need to get over this suspicion that this lack of trust for me, and the violent lashing out that it promises is a betrayal. He feels betrayed. Her husband feels betrayed. Shahryar was betrayed by his first wife, and he is lashing out because of that. But she is pointing out that, in fact, his refusal to trust her, that his brutal psychological warfare on her is a violation in itself. It is a betrayal. It's a betrayal of presumably the vows they took as husband and wife. He breaks down and agrees. Everything is made happy again. Well, the Caliph, functioning kind of as a deus ex machina, comes in and expresses mercy. The the she demon shows up. That was the lizard before, and expresses mercy. The Caliph expresses mercy. The Caliph marries the sisters off to different members of his family, nobles, and he brings them all in and holds them close, brings them into his family. In fact, he marries one, and it is a sign of coming together. And this is the wise king, the respected George Washington type figure, exercising mercy on everybody, exercising judicial punishments, and saying, above all else, we have to have some sense of justice. We can't just act off, fly off the handle. We need to have it be rational. We need to have it make sense. And by doing this, he is saying, or she is saying, Shahrazad is saying, that this is what a good king does. Acts rationally, proportionally, thinks with mercy first. All Islamic principles, all basic understandings of how to define a good king. And that's what she's trying to drill home to her husband, because Shahryar is sitting there and he has not been a good king. He is still in the process of not being a good king. But he is learning through this repeated undertow of stories and narratives and themes pulling at him to show mercy, justice, proportionality, rationality, just basic decency, and the quality that comes from people uniting in their suffering instead of dividing over them. These are the lessons that she is inculcating slowly, and over time it's working. It's not working yet. We're only on, what is this, the 69th night, and it's we got a ways to go. The totality of it is of the work is it's a bit of a mix and match project, where different editors have come up with different versions of it, and translations have had some freedom of play in there. But essentially, at the end, by the 1001st night, the Shahrazad and her husband have had children, a couple of them at this point. It makes me wonder, how they managed to do that when every night they're just telling stories and her sister is sitting there. But they have kids, and at the end, in one version of it, she comes out and she shows them at one point, brings the kids in front of him one morning and says, okay, we have gone through this. We have done this again and again and again. Look at these children here, and you will see, if you kill me, you're going to leave these kids motherless. And do you really want to do that? And in this thing, he says, no, I will not. I forgive you entirely. I will not make you a victim. I love you. I love my family. I love my kids. I don't want to impose that on anyone. I'm going to free this edict, and we're going to do away with all of this. And he even says at one point, Even before the arrival of these children, I had intended to pardon you, and I have seen that you are a chaste and pure woman, freeborn and God-fearing. May God bless you, your father and mother, and your whole family, root and branch. I call God to witness that I have decided that no harm is to come to you. He decided before they had kids. They have several at this point. But he just let her keep telling stories. Now, again, you can sort of get distracted by the sociopathic nature of that. It's cruel by any definition. But also, why would he do it? I think that's a fair question. Why would he do it? Curiosity. He wanted to know the stories. He liked hearing the stories, and he wanted to know how they turned out. And maybe he's having that argument with himself a couple of times for years on end, saying, I could tell her. I could say, you really don't have to do this, honey. I forgive you. I forgive my ex-wife or whatever. I forgive everybody. I just want everybody to be happy, and we're going to have a nice little family. But he doesn't. He doesn't tell her this. And it is it's cruel. But he does it because he's curious, because he's drawn to the stories, because the stories have hooked him. And the power of that curiosity fuels his story consumption for years after its objective purpose was fulfilled. He knew he wasn't going to kill her, but he wanted to hear the stories, because that curiosity is more powerful than any reason and any sense of logic. Curiosity is a human condition. It is a irrevocable human condition, and it can be used for good, like Shahrazad uses it, or it can be used for bad. The curiosity at different points of seduction, of wanting to know the illicit, wanting to know the dangerous. Tell me what's really going on. It's dirty stuff, maybe. That has a kind of a destructive quality to it. That has an almost pornographic tinge to it, where you're not made better because of your curiosity. But if put to good use, to good ends, to morally uplifting material, shall we say, it can be a wonderful engine for human progress. But I also want to just point out also that the form of this story, of these stories, is also an engine of that, because what we see once again is an enormously complex pattern that is a story of a story and a story within a story, who's telling another story, who remembers a different story and is looking forward to yet another story, and that leads to a different story and somebody else. And it's mind-boggling. It's confusing. It's overwhelming. You cannot understand it. If at any point you're in the middle of that story or any story and you're flipping back and forth and saying, wait, what, this, and that, what, that's intentional. That is the pattern. That's the purpose of the pattern. The pattern is too complex to really get a hold of, to really understand, to have it make sense, because we are all human beings, which means we're limited. We are ultimately kind of stupid. But just think in terms of what that means applied outward. This is very much like Islamic pattern art, where these enormously complex shapes and geometric designs interlock in remarkable ways, and you can never quite tell when you're looking at something, well, is one element framing another, or is that the element within the frame, or is the frame really the element, or where does it begin, where does it end, does it mean anything, what is this, is there some organized pattern to it, or is the pattern itself chaotic, how far does it go, there are irregularities here, but does that make sense, and maybe if we just zoom out it'll mean something else. The pattern is overwhelming. And this is why they're used in mosques around the world, because it's supposed to mirror or represent in some way the awesome submission to God. Because in Islamic art, you cannot have representational images. You certainly cannot have a painting of Muhammad somewhere. You have the representation of God's unknowableness. The pattern itself is a representation of the works of God, which we as human beings cannot quite understand. We can try, but we're human beings, we're limited, we're never going to get there. The pursuit of it, driven by curiosity, drives us to be better people, or it can also drive us to be worse people. There are a lot of people who profess divine sanction in their actions, and they're really just acting in purely evil ways. But here we see art trying to replicate that process of leading you into the pattern, into the maze, and putting you in a situation where your instincts, driven by curiosity, will lead you forward. And it's the trying to get forward, the trying to figure it out, that can have a benefit. Shahryar comes out the other side of figuring out these stories, and he is better for it. We are too, because we're shown these enormously complex stories that are fun, they are enlightening in their own way, they pass the time, and they bring us all together in the experience of sharing them. But ultimately, you can't reach any final meaning. There is no final meaning here, at least none that we are smart enough to detect, or that even the authors and the editors of this were ever able to construct, because we're all just stumbling in the dark. And that's what this story does. It leads us through the maze, and maybe it shows us through another side, but there's never any answer to it. There's never any explanation of the maze. It's complex, it's beyond us. And it's the submission to that reality, the humbling admission that we can't know it all. All we can try and do is be better people. That's where the grace comes in. That's where a kind of divinity enters the project. And if you can harness that and match it up with curiosity, then you're in the realm of great, great